You have a life most people would want, and somehow it's still not enough. Not in a dramatic way. No crisis, no collapse. Just a quiet, persistent feeling that something is missing. Something you can't name. Something that makes you scroll a little longer, stay up a little later, and wonder why nothing quite lands the way it should. That feeling has a name, but nobody's saying it out loud. Here's the truth most people sense but won't admit. The life that was supposed to make you happy keeps not doing that. And the longer you ignore that, the louder the emptiness gets. So what's actually happening? You were handed a life built for comfort, convenience on demand, stimulation in your pocket, entertainment that never ends, safety without sacrifice. And somewhere inside all of that, you stop feeling things deeply. Not because you're broken, because the system works exactly as designed. It just wasn't designed for you to feel alive. It was designed to keep you occupied. Think about the last time you genuinely felt satisfied. Not entertained, not distracted. Satisfied. The kind of feeling that settles in your chest after you did something hard. Something that cost you something. When was that? Because there's a difference between pleasure and fulfillment that most people have stopped noticing. Pleasure is easy. It shows up in 2 seconds and disappears in 3. Fulfillment is something else entirely. It requires friction. It requires effort. It requires that you earn it. And a life designed to remove discomfort quietly removes the very thing that creates genuine meaning. This is the paradox nobody explains to you. The more comfortable your life becomes, the harder it is to feel anything real inside it. Not because you're ungrateful, because the human mind was never built for frictionless living. It was built for resistance, for a challenge, for the satisfaction of doing something difficult and surviving it. Strip that out, and what's left? A feed that never ends, options that never satisfy, a life that looks full from the outside and feels hollow from the inside. And then you tell yourself, maybe I just need more, a better job, a bigger apartment, a new relationship, a different city. So you pursue the upgrade, and it works for a moment. The feeling lifts briefly, and then it returns, quieter but heavier. That cycle has a name in psychology, but you don't need the name. You felt it, the reset, the brief lift, the return. What nobody tells you about that cycle is what it's actually doing. It isn't failing you, it's protecting you. Every time you reach for the next thing, you don't have to ask the harder question underneath. And the harder question is this: what am I avoiding by keeping my life this full? Because a full life can be a hiding place, not a conscious one. Nobody wakes up and decides to fill their calendar to avoid their own thoughts. It happens slowly, one commitment at a time, one notification at a time, one small distraction stacked on another until the noise becomes the baseline and silence starts to feel wrong. That's not an accident, that's adaptation. You adapted to a world that rewards busyness and punishes stillness. And now the stillness feels threatening, not because anything is actually wrong, but because stillness is where the unanswered questions live. Constant stimulation is a brilliant strategy for never having to sit with yourself. And sitting with yourself is the one thing modern life has made nearly impossible. There is always something, always a notification, always something to watch, always a reason to not be where you are. And presence, real presence, is the thing that makes experience feel like something. Without it, you can travel to the most beautiful place on earth and spend half of it deciding how to frame the photo. You can have a conversation with someone you love and be somewhere else entirely. You can have everything and feel nothing, because feeling requires presence, and presence requires a kind of stillness that the modern world profits from you never achieving. So you stay busy, you stay stimulated, you stay just distracted enough to avoid the question, and then you wonder why you're lonely. Here's the part about connection that almost no one says plainly. You are more reachable than any human being in history. You can talk to hundreds of people in seconds. You can see what everyone is doing at every moment. And yet, something in you knows that most of those interactions don't touch anything real. Because there's a difference between contact and connection. And most people have quietly traded one for the other without noticing. Contact is easy. You can have it constantly. Connection requires something more dangerous. It requires you to be actually present, to be seen without the edit, to stay in a conversation when it gets uncomfortable, to invest in someone without a guaranteed return, to be known, not just liked. That kind of connection is slow. It's inconvenient. It doesn't fit the rhythm of a life that runs on speed and efficiency. So slowly, without any single decision you can point to, you replace depth with volume. You have more relationships and feel less understood. More interactions and fewer moments where someone actually sees you. And the loneliness that follows isn't the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of being surrounded and still not feeling found. That's a different kind of empty. It's harder to name, and it's harder to fix because on paper, nothing is wrong. That's the part that makes it so disorienting. You can't justify the feeling. You can't explain it to someone else without sounding ungrateful. You have friends, you have plans, you have a life that looks full. And yet, in the quiet moments, in the ones you can't fill fast enough, something underneath tells you that none of it is reaching the part of you that actually needs to be reached. Now, here's the layer underneath all of that: identity, who you actually are when no one is watching and nothing is performing. Most people have never met that person. Not really. Not as adults. Because identity in the modern world is built outward. It's built for visibility. You learn very young which version of you gets approval, which parts to show, which parts to hide. And slowly, you get so good at presenting the right version that you stop knowing where the presentation ends and the actual you begins. This is not a weakness. This is what happens to almost everyone. The self becomes a strategy, a curated response to other people's expectations. And the more successful the strategy, the more invisible the real self becomes. And emptiness is what happens when you lose contact with yourself. Not depression necessarily, not grief, just a vague, flat quality to everything. Like you're watching your own life from slightly outside it. Like the things that are supposed to matter don't quite land with the weight they should. Like you're performing your own existence instead of living it. That's not the mood. That's a signal. The signal isn't telling you something is wrong with you. It's telling you something is wrong with the distance. The distance between the person you actually are and the one you've been presenting. The longer that gap stays open, the heavier the emptiness gets. Because some part of you knows. It always knows. You can outrun it for years. But you can't close it by adding more to the outside of your life. And here's the thing about signals. They don't go away when you ignore them. They get louder. Or they go underground and come back as something harder to trace. Irritability you can't explain. Exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. A flatness that sits underneath even the good moments. The hollowness you've been quietly outrunning has a way of catching up in the worst possible pauses. In the silence after something good happens. In the middle of the night when nothing is wrong. In the gap between one distraction and the next. And in that gap, if you're honest, you already know. You already know that the scrolling isn't filling anything. You already know the next upgrade won't complete you. You already know the version of your life you've been building for the outside isn't the same as the one you actually want to live on the inside. You know this. You've known it for a while. So why keep going? Because the alternative requires something most people aren't ready for. It requires you to stop running, to sit with the quiet, to let the unanswered questions surface, to feel the gap between the life you're living and the life that would actually mean something. Not the gap as a failure, as information. That's not a small ask. That's one of the hardest things a person can do in a world that offers infinite reasons to never do it. Here's what makes that so hard to act on. The emptiness doesn't feel urgent. It doesn't arrive like a crisis. It arrives like background noise. Persistent, but ignorable. And a feeling you can ignore is a feeling you can postpone. So you do. You tell yourself you'll deal with it later. When things calm down. When life slows. When you have more time or more clarity or more certainty about what you're even looking for. But later keeps becoming now. And now keeps feeling exactly the same. And underneath all of the postponing is something that rarely gets named directly. Fear. Not dramatic fear. Quiet fear. The fear that if you stop and actually look at your life without the distraction, without the noise, without the constant motion, what you find might require you to change something real. something you're comfortable with, something that has become part of how you define yourself. Because the life you've built, even the hollow parts of it, is familiar. And familiar is its own kind of safety. It takes courage to want something more honest when the comfortable version is already in place. Most people never find that courage. Not because they're weak, because the cost looks too high from the outside. But here's the part nobody talks about. The cost of staying is higher. It's just slower. It compounds quietly over years. And one day you look up and realize that the life you were too afraid to examine became the life you were too numb to leave. That's the real risk. Not the risk of change, the risk of never starting. But here's the quiet truth the emptiness has been trying to tell you all along. It was never about what you had. It was always about what you were willing to feel. The fullness you're looking for isn't on the other side of more, it's on the other side of honesty. And you've known that for longer than you're willing to admit.